Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with veteran jazz percussionist and composer Tom Nazziola. He opened up about his new 2021 CD called Distant Places, where he travels through time and geography. This work features the premiere recordings of 12 works and a stellar lineup of musicians. Over the years, his music has been featured on virtually every medium in the world of composition. From live film music to choral and orchestral pieces, his work has been performed in France, Ireland, Slovenia, Guatemala, Croatia, and throughout the United States. He has also played with the likes of Rufus Reid, Dave Liebman, Bob Brookmeyer, George Russell, Terrance Blanchard, and so many others. He's got a great story.
Thank you for sending the CD in the mail. I really enjoyed it. Thanks for taking time out. Speaking of the CD, I guess before we get into the actual construction of this project, it's coming out kind of on the tail end of this global pandemic, no live shows, everything being upended for musicians. Talk to me a little bit about your thoughts on releasing music now and kind of how this feels.
To be honest, I didn't think about releasing it, I should say, relation between that and the pandemic. This is an album I've been working on for years. So it was really about, as soon as I felt it was finished in terms of mixing, mastering, and all of that, I just wanted to make sure there's enough space to get some feedback with, PR, then to go ahead and release it. So I wasn't really too conscious of that. I guess I kind of accepted it as well because we're all in the same boat. Also, I guess in a positive sense, knowing that everybody was home most of this time, it's a chance for people to check out things where they may be too busy to do so otherwise.
Right on. Well, talk to me about the creative angle you went for with this. What ultimately were you trying to get at, and what do you hope the audience gets from this?
I like that question because it's usually they're about more specific tracks. I really wanted this to be the experience of like going to a show where you hear a number of different styles and pieces, and each one is kind of part of a larger story. So it's something that I'm hoping people will sit and listen through and feel like they're going on a journey through all these different colors and places, that it, appeals to most everyone. I think that the material on here is pretty accessible. I mean, there might be some exceptions, but I really wanted it to be something that anybody could listen to and enjoy, even if they're not in tune with this kind of music.
The one thing that's unique about you, too, is that, kind of the international approach that you have and where you've been and where you've presented this. How has scanning and spanning the globe, so to speak, influenced the way that you approach, the way you craft music and put out what you create?
I think it's really been a result of I've always been open to listening to all kinds of music. I never had any limitations as to what I want to check out. I mean, I know there's some people who want to stay within a certain genre, and that's what they like, but, I wouldn't even think about it. If I heard, for instance, a Middle Eastern track, something from that background, and it appealed to me, it would somehow find its way into my writing. So it's not even an effort to say, okay, I'm going to incorporate a Middle Eastern feel plus this and that. It just comes out in writing the piece. So I think what happens is after you listen to enough stuff, it kind of filters through you and your voice in whatever way that happens.
So speaking of your voice, talk to me about the beginnings of your life, kind of where you were born and raised and how music became your world.
Sure. I mean, I was born in New Jersey. My father is a musician. He sings and plays guitar. I grew up around music because of that, and there were instruments in the house, so it also made it easy to just want to play or to have access to the different instruments. So that helped in learning to play a lot of different things. My father's music that he played was pretty much the pop of the 50s and 60s, so that is a big part of my background in terms of listening to pop moving forward. So I moved from there to jazz, classical, and whatever else came my way. I like to be open to any of those elements. So I'm kind of glad I had that background, because I think sometimes people who might go just the trajectory of straight jazz or classical, are missing a little something that kind of rounds you out. I think the more things you're exposed to, and the more that you listen to, no matter what your area of specialty is, it definitely helps you and enhances what you do.
Speaking of jazz, who were some musicians that really influenced the way that you decided to approach your music?
Okay, I mean, there's all of the usual suspects, I mean, that everyone listens to in jazz at the very beginning. I mean, from, Charlie Parker to Coltrane to Herbie Hancock, Miles, all of that group. But people outside of, let's say, the main group that have really moved me in some way would be someone like Bill Frisell on guitar, Keith Jarrett. I've been a big fan of the ECM artists who came out in the 70s and 80s, Jan Gabarek, Christensen, Eberhard Weber. All those guys really influenced me in their take on jazz with the third stream approach. So I'd say those are the more recent influences in terms of, the whole spectrum of jazz. I should mention Jack DeJohnette. Love him.
So talk to me a little bit about the first live jazz experience that you had that made you think, man, that's something I would love to do.
I think I came into it more slowly than most people, and that's probably why what I do is a little more diverse in terms of that sound. It was, I guess, I don't know if you call it a jazz album, but it's probably in that spectrum. I'd have to say Bright Size Life, Pat Metheny. In particular, I wound up studying with Bob Moses a little bit, who's on that album, and I also became a big fan of Jaco Pastorius. So that album kind of led me in that direction, and it made me think that, wow, this is a music that I would like to know more about and include in my life somehow.
You've been around for a while. You played around a lot of players, a lot of veterans, a lot of big names in music. What have you learned from them that you, in turn, have imparted to younger players around you? Any advice or any ways of carrying yourself as a musician?
It's, that's kind of tough because the way that I was trained or the way that I learned, a lot of that would probably not be acceptable today because you mentioned the veterans and the older cats. I mean, they had a certain way of doing things, and it wasn't always, let's say, politically correct or straight ahead. You kind of had to accept the personality of the person that was teaching you and pull the information out, which is what they were going to give you. So I find that I try to take some of the principles from them and figure out a way to translate it. So, for instance, the main tenet of just working hard, practicing, writing as much as you can, not being upset when things don't come to you very quickly. I think there's that kind of discipline that I've learned from the older teachers and players, where you have to actually train yourself to stay at it even though the returns don't happen when you'd like them to. I think that was probably one of the biggest things.
So did you always know you were going to be a musician, or were there other dreams that you had?
No, it's weird. I don't know if it was even ever a dream. It's just something I was kind of born into and kept doing it. I mean, I started playing when I was 3-4 years old, and it just kept going from there. It started with the drums, and then a piano was added probably around 8-9 years old. And I just kept going within music and doing whatever happened along the way.
So every day you wake up and you get to create music. What's the most enjoyable part about being a musician?
I think it's the end product of what you do. So I'd have to say, a lot of that journey of writing the music, like putting this album together, is can be difficult and not always enjoyable. It's basically an effort to arrive at this final product that you really enjoy. So for me, it's being patient to know that when I'm finished doing what I'm doing and work through it and go through the toil and everything else, that we're going to wind up with something that's really satisfying. So I really always think, or keep my eye on the prize to say, it's what this is going to be in the end that I'm working towards. So even if you don't enjoy it along the way all the time, you kind of keep your vision on that, the end game.
So I guess the big elephant in the room, realistically, in our world right now is this pandemic and, getting back to live music. And my question is, when we do return more in earnest to the live environment, what do you hope we all realize about the power of live music that we've been vacated from for so long?
I think that the aspect that's probably most important is the fact that you could enjoy it with other people. So, we whether it's live music or recording, we can get access to that sound and enjoy it, and that's always available to us. But I think there is something about being in a room or a hall with other people who are experiencing the same thing, especially if there's a strong reaction to the piece. That's unique. It's unique to a live audience.
During this time, there's a lot of self-reflection for everybody on the planet. I mean, it was a very unified event. My question to you is, what did you learn about yourself over this time that's going to make you stronger as you reemerge?
That's a really great question because it's so unique to what we've been going through. I think the self-reflection part was basically realizing what I've always said in the past, but maybe not always done, which is to say, do what's important to you now instead of waiting for a time where it might be more convenient. And since everything was basically shut down during the pandemic, you had the option to really pursue the things that you wanted to do. It wasn't really about money because that was not even a concern that you could be able to do something about that for most people. So you're then able to say, well, what is it I want to work on and do, especially since you're also aware of people who are passing away and not surviving the pandemic. So it really encouraged me to do what it is I'm saying, which is, hey, you want to finish this album, that album, you want to write or record these pieces, do it all now as much as you can. That's been a great experience because I really put anything that was on the back burner to the front.
So, very simply put, why do you love jazz?
I love the fact that it's always changing. It's always evolving. So, I think when people say the word jazz, a lot of people think of the earlier roots of jazz, swing, bebop. But the fact of the matter is it's actually a genre that keeps evolving and changing. And I mean, we have lots of great artists out there today who don't necessarily play swing per se, but their music is born out of the jazz tradition, and it just keeps extending the genre. So I love that it's always evolving.
I think that's the thing that I realized, for years before this pandemic, I would ask somebody, especially in education, how strong, how powerful, how healthy is jazz in, say, 2017 or 18. I don't ever have to ask that again because of this pandemic. I was blown away by how many itineraries that were so filled to the brim that went away immediately. I don't think we could ever question the viability and strength of this art form.
Yeah, I agree.
My final question to you is this. Everyone has a perception or interpretation of who they think you are, your family, your friends, your fans, your students, but ultimately You're the one that's living your life. Who do you think you are?
I mean, I would, if I were to react quickly, which is probably the best way, I would say just a composer of music. And I wouldn't even go into details of what that music is, just creating or composing music. I think on this album, although there's definitely a jazz element, it's always been hard to categorize what I'm doing because I really do move around a lot. I mean, there are a few tracks on the album like Over the Horizon and Velvet Carnival, which are definitely more towards the, I'd say, modern classical genre. But there's so much that's influenced by my jazz background in those pieces. But yeah, I would just say a composer of music.
Sometimes the simplicity is the best way to go. Tom, hey, thanks for opening up about the album, the world, your history of music. I appreciate it.
No, thank you, Joe.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in New Jersey, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Tom for his time, music, and cool. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit Neon Jazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.